Today I'm going to show you how to sketch a scene in pen and apply a wash of watercolour afterwards. I have chosen to use a permanent drawing pen. These are available in different makes and sizes, for example Staedtler, Edding or Artline. Here I've got a selection of different thickness nibs. So I've got a 0.1, which is a very fine pen, a 0.4, which is more of a medium nib, and a 0.8, which is thicker. Here I'm working on a £140 knot, which is a cold pressed paper with a slight texture. These little examples here, I've worked on a smooth hot pressed paper. Alternatively, just use a good quality or reasonable thickness cartridge paper. The quality of the line depends on the pressure applied when using the pen and the way the pen is held. So for example, if I hold the pen very upright, I can get a strong, firm line. This can still be sort of broken. If I use the pen on the side, I get a looser, thinner, almost sort of scratchier line. So even though that's just a 0.4 pen, I can get the variation of thickness by using the pen in a different way. Here I've got two different interpretations of pen and wash that I've done of the doorway. Here I've used purely line, so very little detail in the ink, and the variation in tone has been produced by the use of watercolour. In this example here, I've used far more ink, so it's far more detailed, and the variation of tone is created by the ink, so I can be a little bit looser or softer with the watercolour. It's a good idea to just practice making marks to achieve the effect of the foliage there. I've just used like little S shapes. They can be light or stronger, and to build up tone I'm just going over the previous marks that I've made. I could use a vertical stroke, cross-hatch, a diagonal cross-hatching effect, press very firmly to get deeper, solid tones, or stipple. That can be an effective way of building up tone. So again, just stippling over and over again. Here are the materials that I'm using today. So I have my reference photograph of the white doorway, my 0.4 pen, my number 6 brush and a B pencil, £140 knot watercolour paper, and a selection of watercolour paints: quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, transparent yellow, or you could use cadmium yellow pale, raw sienna or yellow ochre, scarlet lake and Payne's grey. Pen and wash is a very liberating medium, but to begin with, drawing directly with ink can feel rather daunting. Initially you may feel more confident making a light sketch in pencil to guide you, but keep it very simple and just suggest basic shapes. So here I started with the doorway by putting in a central line. I put in the left side and then mirrored it on the right side. I looked at the proportions, the width of the door in relationship to the height to help me get the correct portions. And I also just put some initially guidelines to help me get the width of the panels. I also divided the top section into 8s. Here it is in halves. I divided those into quarters and then divided them further into eighths. I'm going to begin by indicating where the foliage is, because it breaks over the doorway. And I'm just getting an impression of the wisteria, the way it sort of grows downwards. I could almost use a little stipple as well. So just very loose in impressionistic. I can always strengthen this up later. Hint of the branches there. Let's just go in a little bit more depth, so it's a slightly thicker line here and there. And a leafy texture. Then the shrubs, I'm just giving a loose leafy outline, just holding the pen quite lightly and moving it in different directions to give sort of a leafy texture. Also some little circles to suggest some red flower heads. I'm going to keep this sort of fairly light, more of a line drawing without too much detail in or depth in the pen. This one's just a little bit finer. I'm just going to fade off. Okay, then I'll start with the doorway. Now this can be as loose as you want it, or it could be really tight. Everyone has their own style with ink. just going to add a bit more ink just to make it stronger. They're almost sort of recessed panels. Then a hint of the brickwork. And finally, just a few sort of little touches here and there. It's nice to just vary the strength. It's just a few darks. So I'm just pressing a little bit harder with my pen. Just put on the doorstep, I've got a white top and just a few vertical lines. That also helps you to see where you are when it gets sort of quite busy in an area. And now for the painting. So I'm going to start with the foliage again, using my quinacridone magenta and ultramarine to mix 2 pools pinky mauve pool and a pool that has more of the ultramarine in. Right, so I'm going to work directly wet on dry, and I'm just taking the colour over the ink, so I'm not actually colouring in or filling in, I'm just working directly over the top of the ink work while that's still damp, going in with a slightly stronger, the mauvey bluer shade. Just drop that in, so if areas are still wet, the two colours will just soften, bleed together. A bit more of a pink shade in as well. Could even use a little bit of a neat blue, a neat ultramarine. Just dropping that in with the point of my brush, let it just spread out a little bit. Then I'm going to mix a green. That's transparent yellow and ultramarine. It's sort of quite yellowy. In fact, Wisteria leaves, it's quite olive, so I'm going to just put a little bit of Scarlet Lake into that green. I'm just doing a downward motion. It doesn't matter if it bleeds in with the mauve. Just put a little bit more. Now for the shrubs, I'm just going to put a touch of Scarlet Lake into those little dots that I've put there for the flower heads. Then I'm going back to my green, transparent yellow and ultramarine blue. Again, it's quite yellowy towards the top of the shrub. And I'm just going to work around those flower heads. And I'll just let that soften upwards so it's lighter. Just leaving touches of white as well. Just rinse my brush a bit and dilute up towards the top And while it's still damp, I'm just going to just put a little touch more green in the base. Again, just a touch of a hot red, like a Scarlet Lake. Just in that base, just to give it some form. So that's bit on wet. And then the other one, again, it's almost a slightly stronger version. Again, I'm just leaving little touches of white. And touched with a little bit of water to just vary the tone. And again, a little bit more strength towards the base. Right, now I'm going to put my shadows in. I'm mixing a grey here, my purple with a touch of raw sienna to just tone it down. And I'm almost keeping those three pools of colour, the purple, the grey and the ochre, or raw sienna. I'm just going to put a touch of raw sienna on this shadowed area, the recess of the doorway. Then on top of that, my mauvey grey mix, so it just bleeds into it. Taking that shadow down there, a little bit of shadow underneath that ridge. And also those recesses, just a hint of colour. And I'm going to make that colour just slightly stronger and paint the shadows from the wisteria coming over the doorway and underneath, sort of echoing the downward shape of the growth of the wisteria, and under the light and also on this side. And I can put this shadow on even before I apply the top colour of the path. Just a little bit more mauve in the mix. I'm just going to put a bit of that over the top of the green. On the brickwork, just a little bit of tone on that. Also along that edge of the step. going to use a little bit of Payne's Grey mixed with the hint of Scarlet Lake, just to make it a mauvey grey in the window. Again, just very, very loosely. Just going to put a touch of a neater blue just towards the top. It's almost reflecting the sky. Touch in there. Then using that Payne's Grey mix, put a little bit of a mauvey base on the glass, on top of the doorway, just very loosely again. A touch of that Payne's Grey into it. So that it bleeds slightly. And the path, I'm just going to use my raw sienna mixed with my quinacridone magenta. Not too much pink in there. And providing this is dry, I can just put a glaze over the top of it. Perhaps with again a little bit of mauve, so I'm unifying the painting with the mauve coming through, and finally a little yellow into the quinacridone magenta or even the Scarlet Lake to make a golden shade. The letterbox and door handle. I'll just put a hint of the green. Again, I'll take that over the shadow. And finally, a little bit of splatter. Just going to use my mauve mix. That just gives a little texture. Finally, I've mixed the red, Scarlet Lake, red and blue with a touch of yellow to make a dark brown. I'm just going to put a hint of that. Into the Wisteria and a little bit more red in the mix. To just suggest this warmer step. that's the final completed painting.